So good afternoon, everybody. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you today. So welcome to Contino's continuation of our CloudFest webinar series. Today, we're going to talk to you about things that you should do once you've completed a lift and shift migration into the public cloud. So we've got 7 actions. So let's move on to the next slide, and we can introduce your 2 presenters today. Brilliant. So first up is myself, Olivier Subramanian. I am an account principal with Contino. I joined Contino 18 months ago from Microsoft, where I was a cloud solution architect for 3 years. And prior to that, I spent 20 years in consulting in some of the big name tier 1 consulting firms. Dougie?
Hi everyone, Dougie, Anscombe-Stephen. Thank you, Ollie. Yes, so I am an account principal like Ollie. So I joined Contino about just over a year ago, actually. So I spent the last 3 or 4 years in consulting. So yes, conversely, as opposed to Ollie, the majority of my career has actually been in industry. Multiple industries across the years, most recently travel, probably a great idea that I'm not in that anymore. Anyway, yes, sorry, back over to Ollie.
Let's move on to the next slide. So for those of you that don't know Contino, I'll give you a brief introduction to us. So Contino are so we are a really strong world-leading consultancy firm that's sort of really been built out of the enterprise DevOps space to now include really strong cloud native consulting transformation work, data platforms. We are just over 360 people globally. We have offices in the US, in the UK, where we are headquartered, and also in Asia Pac as well. Over the course of the 6 years that we've been running, we've had over 400 engagements, and these run from doing assessments all the way through to full-scale transformation projects, but always built around a sort of engineering and consultative manner, working in partnership with our customers. And we've had over 200 plus customers, often in highly regulated environments, and you can just see a few of the examples of the customers that we've been working with down below there, but I'm not going to take you through those now. So, Dougie, should we move on to the agenda, please? Right, so let me just take you through what we're going to talk about today. So we'll start off with just by setting the scene. So the title hopefully will have given you a good idea of what we're going to talk about. Then I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about, well, what's not quite right? Why does my cloud suck, basically? Then we'll go through 7 actions to get you back on track. And Dougie, I think, is probably going to throw a little spanner in there just to talk a little bit about something else that we need to consider, and then we'll just finalize with some conclusions and takeaways. So let's get cracking, Dougie. Let's go into the context setting. So moving to cloud. So I'm sure that given that you're attending the webinar, you're probably on this journey yourselves or are thinking about it. But just let's put the scene. So the market for the global public cloud this year is set to be $266 billion. And I've even read that actually might be greater than that because of COVID and the lockdown and the fact that there's been a lot of acceleration in moving activities into the cloud to enable the workforce to be remote. 41% of enterprises will be running on public cloud by 2020. So that's a great statistic. What does that really mean? So it means that they're going to be running some sort of service in the public cloud by this year. I think that if you think about it, if you look at some of the stats, you'll see that all of the Fortune 500 are running on the public cloud, but actually that could be a variety of different types of services, from things like Office or to actually running your websites in the cloud, or even running back-end systems such as SAP HANA or something like that. So we can take these statistics with a little bit of a pinch of salt, even though they come from great sources, Gartner, Forbes, and even Unisys. But what I have noticed is that the most organizations, when they start moving to the cloud, they start with a lift and shift migration. This is starting to change. I think we're seeing more people adopt a sort of re-architecting approach, trying to take advantage of cloud native, and we'll sort of talk a bit more about that as we go through the webinar. And then this next stat around 37% of businesses failing to realize their benefits, and this is part of the reason why we've put this webinar together, and the white paper that accompanies it is that just moving to the cloud is not the only thing you need to do. So you have to plan it. You've got to work out what the business case is. You need to understand how you can get that return. And I think there's been a lot of organizations that maybe need a bit of help in that space.
So Ollie,
go on.
Yeah, so I kind of want to play the advocate on the other side of the story here, because I've been for a lot of journeys in industry as well, noticing where people, like you say, at the moment we're talking about 37% American businesses. That is one stat. There are multiple stats out there. So my argument would be, was it the right thing for that business? Was cloud defined as the right target it should have been? Did they actually look at cloud as a concept and use it for what it is for? I mean, we talk about lift and shift, right? So lift and shift is the reason why we're here, and the point there is that what they saw, and they said, okay, well, public cloud is just someone else's data center. It's nice and cheap, and I'm going to basically take what I've got and plonk it in there. So what I'm going to start focusing on throughout some of these slides, as we talk about one of the 7 actions, is around making that right decision. So it doesn't always have to be cloud. We talk about moving to cloud like it's a fixed trajectory. So we're going to talk a little bit later on. We're going to talk about some positives and some actionable things. But I want you guys to always think about cloud's not the only rodeo in town, right? So on that note, over to you, Ollie.
Over to me. Okay, so all right, so why does my cloud suck? So you've done your lift and shift, you've done the hard work of getting out of your data center, and it's not all it's not come up smelling of roses. And there are some things that you might relate to, and I've put some common challenges here. So you're not achieving the cost savings that you thought you would. You've got you just have mess for less, which is a phrase that some of you might be familiar with, but I will talk a bit more about. And you're not achieving business agility. And these are sort of like key things that the public cloud sort of sells itself on. And if you're not getting these, then something's not quite right. So Dougie, let's go on to go into these in a bit more detail on the next slide. So why am I spending more? So when you enter into your migration, you've probably got a business case about saving money because you're moving out of your data center. You're only paying for what you consume now, and you're also not having to pay for heating and maybe rent for the buildings and things like that. The challenge that you face is during this migration period is that there's a transition that happens. You end up running in 2 places over a period of time while that transition is happening, and sort of like graph is sort of there to show you that there variation in costs, and you can see that the total cost goes above what your current DC spend, and the the impact of that is that often then you try to rush things to manage that cost effectively, and that results in taking shortcuts in doing the migration. So you end up spending more than you would do, and these all sort of add up, and so you end up running with a higher cost than you anticipate. If we go on to, let's go on to the next slide now, Dougie. So mess for less. Now, I'm not sure if many of you have heard this. Certainly, it's a term that is quite common amongst the people that work within the public cloud. And what do I mean by this? You've taken your on-premise data center and you've dropped it into the cloud as is. So you're adopting a physical data center approach and architecture and design and applying that into the cloud. And this is this brings out some challenges. So network change in the public cloud is all triggered by by code. It's very automated. You issue a command and the change is made. Physical data centers don't necessarily work that way, and you have more complexity in trying to manage physical network virtual appliances. So if you put firewalls in place that traditionally would have been in line on a traditional physical data center, that no longer applies in a software-defined network, for example. Understanding your costs is more complex. So you're moving from a capex to an opex model. You pay for what you use, and potentially you'll have multiple different business services running in one architecture, and that can get hard to then, how do you allocate those costs back if you are just putting your systems as is into the cloud. You can design to take advantage of some of the features of cloud, and we'll talk a little bit about that in one of the actions. The security boundaries and controls are inappropriate. So on a physical data center, the goal is to secure the perimeter, and you spend less time. Once that's secure, then you know that no one's going to get in. In the public cloud, you have to take a different model, and you really need to think of it as layers of the onion and putting controls in each part of the cloud architecture. You also end up with minimal automation. So one of the great benefits of public cloud is that it's all driven by APIs, and you can build things and tear things down just by writing a bit of code or clicking on a dashboard, and that doesn't lend itself so well when you're trying to you building servers that could maintain state and which is fine in the physical world, but in the virtual cloud world, that causes problems, because if you tear it down and build it back up again, or you want to scale up, you can't do that so readily without having to put some workarounds on the state. And just around failover, so that tends to be a bit more complex. You don't have it doesn't necessarily work the same way in a software-defined network as it does in a physical network. So the diagram there is what I've called a cloud architecture, and it's a zero trust network design. So what we mean by zero trust is that you're not putting any areas within that architecture that are open to breach. You've got controls in place, and you've got mechanisms to check for breach all the way through that different architecture. I think probably talked enough about that. Let's move on to what you got.
Just quickly, Ollie. So one of the points here is what we see a lot, right? And that's down to education. So I think anybody who's on this call, generally anybody that we do business with, has a lot of support from your CSPs. You have a lot of support from us. So there are lots of different avenues that you can explore some of the learnings and education around what public cloud is for. And you can see on the right hand side here that a lot of managed services. Okay, so in an on-prem data center, generally don't have those types of things available to you, certainly not to the power. So again, it's you'll see a lot of tips we go through here, but one of them is around education. You know, don't think that because you've done it in an on-premise that, you know, with my argument earlier, it's someone else's data center. Well, yes, it is, but it's a hell of a lot more, much more powerful. And one of the things that we're going to go through soon in one of these slides is we'll be hooked into education, but it's how to utilize and how to actually get the best out of using cloud as opposed to what Ollie just described. I'm just going to move on now to the next one, Ollie.
Okay. So I think Dougie, chime in on this one because I know you've got some thoughts around
this. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So we talk about agility, okay? So exactly what I've just spoke about. Apart from the education piece, we talk about agility of public cloud. I mean, you know, you can spin things up for seconds. Okay, I can have a web page running for a couple of seconds, close down automatically. Wonderful, and that's all done automatically. Okay, then you have scalability. So I want a web page in New York. Okay, so I put it in US East. I want that same web page to be replicated in Japan. Done. I can scale up. Now I want 20 million people. Unlikely, I know, but I want the capability to have 20 million people concurrently access my web page. That would cost me incredible amounts of money, but guess what? I can do it. But also, as I said, I can do it anywhere. Right? I can put it anywhere. I can spin up whatever services I like. I can take down whatever services I like. And I get the benefits from the CSPs of investing an incredible sum of money every single year on cutting edge technology. So access to new services. Global reach. So we know that over probably up to about 3-4 years ago, there wasn't a massive geographical reach. But as companies, especially as they come online now, we're starting to see their customers everywhere. And the thing is, ideally, you don't want a customer, in, let's say, Vietnam, accessing a web service that's sitting in a data center in the Isle of Man. That's not what you want. That's not optimal. So not only have we got major regions, we've also got edge locations as well that are starting to spring up everywhere. So again, the CSPs are putting a lot of investment in bringing down that latency, making sure that all these new compelling services are available to more and more and more regions and countries. Increased uptime information, I think we're all aware of that. But also the developer access to the infrastructure as well. So here's where we start talking about DevOps, okay? So where we talk about lifting and shifting architectures, it doesn't necessarily provide all of those benefits, okay? Because we start to look at some of the challenges, right? So VMs aren't, when it comes to lift and shift, right? The VMs that you're carrying over, they aren't configured to make use of the rich services that are now available to them in these cloud ecosystems. A lot of the monitoring solutions, there is a lot of setup that's required there. Fundamentally, if you're porting over, it could be anything. It could be a CRM system, something like that. It's very generally they're going to be tightly coupled, so it's very difficult to unpick all that and make it as I think Ali mentioned it earlier, like a services-oriented architecture and things like that. You can't do that easily. And a few other things. So we talk about managing environments and making sure that you have parity amongst all your environments. It is fundamentally challenging. So a lot of the problems there is that where you have a lot of the ways of working, like your ITIL processes and things like that, which is, I hate to call it legacy. It is, traditional. Well, I think we used the word traditional so far. Some of these things have to change. We look at DevOps as a culture, DevOps as a mindset. We look at DevOps as a principle of operating and developing at the same time, to really get down into the detail of the phrase. This is where cloud really starts to provide some of those benefits if we kind of drop, lift and shift and consider some of the other elements, which I think, Ollie, is probably the best segue I've ever done
That
onto
is
the
amazing.
next slide.
Amazing. Why don't we talk about some of those actions that you can take, Dougie? So look, if you have done a lift and shift, or you're thinking about migrating to the cloud, you can do no worse than listening in to the next set of slides, where I'm going to take you through some of the things that you can do to actually get more value out of what you've currently got, or start to really benefit from being in the cloud itself. So let's go on to the first step, Dougie.
So Ollie, I'll be honest, this is my second favourite. This is
second,
lovely slide.
Second, yeah.
Of course, my one's my favourite, but this is my second favourite.
I think they could have got a cartoon character of Moss from the It Crowd, really, to turn it off. So this sounds really basic, and in many ways it is. When you build out your environments, one of the beauties of public cloud is that you can turn it on and off, and only use what you need to. The way that the pricing models work is that you pay pay by the minute, or even a second with some of the services, for compute power and storage, and then the other factor that you pay for is network bandwidth. Now, if you find that let's say you've got 10 development non-production environments that are running 24/7. Now, unless you're running a follow the sun development team, the likelihood is that they're not going to be used outside of working hours, so you can turn them off. And what's great in public cloud is that there are lots of tools available to you to automate that. So you can turn your VMs on and off using scheduling tools. You can actually have them triggered by events. So a particular event happens, last person logs off, let's say, and that would trigger an event to turn off all of the machines in that environment. There's other tools that you can use, like serverless functions in Azure, or Lambda functions, and CloudWatch events in AWS, and there's the Cloud Scheduler in GCP. And I was running a few numbers through this just to sort of see what the art of the possible is if you turn off your environments. And so if we say that we're running a development environment, and actually in an average 40-hour working week, we turn them off for the rest of the time, that actually over the course of a month is a 76% downtime. So if we turned off the machines during that period of time that they're not being used, we could save 76% of our consumption cost in that particular environment. It's massive saving, and so the potential is great. There are some little caveats you need to think about. So if you've got some persistent storage, that will remain on, and you'll have to pay for that. The likelihood of it is that there will be some people working overtime, so you might not always get that full level of saving, but it's well worth doing, and it's definitely step one on my actions to get better value. Should we go to the next one? So we sort of talked a little bit, we hinted a bit about this before. So when you do your lift and shift, you might have a tool that will help you sort of identify the size of machine that you want to use. But then as time pressures come in, and the cost of running in two places kicks in, that you might find that you actually need to just move it really quickly. So you end up going for the same size machine in the cloud as you had on premise. Now, that's maybe a good starting point, but the reality is that you'll probably find that you're not taking advantage of that power of machine at all. So each cloud has tools to help you with this, but you can also start to measure your utilization of the machines, and and then take action. So action number 2 is to right size your VMs. Use the metrics that are available in each of the cloud capabilities. They will all capture utilization tools targets, and then compare that to the size of the different sizes and classes of machines that you have available to you, and also move to the latest and greatest class as well, because they will in most cases give you a much improved price performance ratio. The other thing to look at, which if you haven't looked at already, is the actual tools that each of the cloud providers gives you. So in Azure, you've got the Azure Advisor service, and that will tell you if you can right size your machines. So that's a great free tool that will give you help. AWS has the cost optimizer, again, which gives you recommendations on how to right size. And Google gives you the Google Compute Engine, which again also provides you with metrics. In addition to that, you can make use of their monitoring tools and their analytics tools to give you more detailed capabilities to then take action. Let's go on to number. Oh, we've got an example now, Dougie, haven't we?
Ooh, have we got an example?
Yeah, we have.
Yes, we have got an example. I just want to quickly say, actually, before we move on to the example, so we looked at remember the scale that we had. So it was here's how much your data center cost. As you transition, there's a peak, okay? Because there's obviously got to be a peak as you retire services, do decommissioning and things like that. You know, a lot of these things are unknown, right? And again, a lot of the sentiment on the board when you come to, transitioning to cloud or cloud transformation or digital transformation, all of these things is, so you came to me and you've asked for $100 million, but you're forecast now to spend $110 million. That's quite a significant difference. And again, it's one of its education. Second one is not using these calculators to your benefit to within obviously a smaller tolerance than 10% of your cost, working out, okay, so here's roughly where we need to be. And also not being afraid to test and learn. These things cost cents, okay? They cost pennies on the pound to test and learn and see what, if you're not quite clear what size VMs, and a lot of the different compute instances, there's so many different types of things. Just test and learn, see which one is right, and that will help you. So here's a good example here. So this is actually a real client who I can't say who it is, but they asked Contino, one of Ollie's and my team, to assess the application compute needs in their Azure estate. Other CSPs are available. They have a small but expensive VM cluster replicating their historical data center architecture. So it's simple steps, to be quite honest, and obviously engineering steps more than anything. So we considered what the cluster of VMs used for the IS application workflows were. We looked at historical utilization patterns. So a lot of this data you can get quite easily. And when you start to look at the calculators within the CSPs, these are the types of information they're looking for. A 3-month period is perfectly adequate. Okay, it's not a challenge. So in this case, it was only only being utilized 15% of the time. It's obviously not particularly optimal. Even for cloud, it's still not particularly optimal. But also it had a high spike of CPU. Generally, it was at the beginning. So in this case, they had offices split up on the US East Coast, West Europe, and also in the Far East as well. So we saw 3 spikes during those times. So fundamentally, I think some of the things are pretty standard. But again, we could only have done this by using, in this case, Azure's Azure Advisor to be able to give us that information. So out came the very explicit report. So we looked at resizing the VMs just to make it a more optimal CPU class. You don't have to, it's because of auto scaling. You don't have to worry about getting something too small. It's okay, because it will scale per your needs. So not only did we look at the smaller CPU capability, we also shrunk the amount as well in the cluster. So again, using scale sets to scale on demand. Now, what we also did as well is, again, is let's get skinny. Okay, let's get really, really small down to minimum viable amounts during the cold periods. Okay, so when there was barely any traffic, let's not manage the complete peak, because don't really need to, right? Nobody's really that bothered about compute power, during the quiet hours. But let's make sure that when it does go up to capacity during those hot periods, that there is enough grunt power there for people to do what they want to do and not have complaints coming in. What we also considered as well, that there was a potential switch option too. So again, it's not always, just because it's a VM's not always the answer. Okay. And yes, thankfully, we save around about 90%. And this isn't, I don't want to say this is a fringe case, because it's not. It doesn't mean that what was there was really bad and painful and horrible and big and beastly. It wasn't like that, because it is what it is. And people have businesses to run, but we like to see them run a little bit leaner, so there's just a little bit more cash in the business. Should we go on to the next one?
I just before we move on, Dougie, I think the little graph there, the donut, is quite interesting in that you can see a sort of good breakdown of where your costs go when you're in the cloud, and you can see that the virtual machines there are 70% of that little cost circle, and that's very much the case, that the CPU is the core cost when it comes to public cloud, very much so. Things like storage and network traffic is a lot cheaper in comparison. I thought it was very interesting. Let's move on. Okay. Right. So what's another action that you can take? So reserved and spot instances. So each of the cloud providers gives you a different type of mechanism for saving more money in your use of compute power, and these take two, and actually there's a third form, but we'll start talking through these. So reserved instances are essentially where you're paying up front for a fixed amount of compute power, and the more time you pay for, the bigger the discount that's available for you. And this is something that you can get across each of the three main clouds, so AWS, Azure, and GCP. And you can see that they're pretty consistent in terms of the discounts that you can get by, so 72% for AWS and Azure, and 69% for GCP. And reserved instances are really good for when you know what your workload's going to be, and it's going to be pretty constant throughout that period of time. What you don't want to be doing is paying for a reserved instance and then not using it over that period of time, because you still have to pay for it. The next type is spot instances, and this is where you are essentially taking advantage of unused capacity within the cloud, and the discounts on here are very high. You can see 90, 90, and 80%, and really good for sort of variable workloads, or where you don't need something to be done sort of in real time, where it's transaction dependent. So good examples are using dev test workloads, or doing sort of very large analytical projects where you might create a grid with across thousands of machines, and they work away, and it doesn't really matter at what point that work is completed, just as long as it is. So spot instances are another really good mechanism for getting savings. And then something that is unique to Google is this sustained use discount. So if you are consistently using your machines over a period of time, then you can get up to 30% discount. And basically, it's a sort of like a rebate if your usage is over a certain period, over a month. Nice in that you're not bound to a long-term contract, and unique to Google, which is great. So let's now go on to the next action, which is about licensing. So I'm sure you've played around with the cloud, and you can spin up a machine or a database and have all of the costs built into that consumption, one consumption cost. But if you're moving an existing environment from on-premise, you'll already have licenses for all of these software components. And one of the things that you can do to get savings in the cloud is to bring your own license across. Great examples are some of the things that you can do with Microsoft and Azure. So if you already have Windows licenses and SQL Server licenses, you can reuse those in the cloud, and just make sure that you've got the correct contract in place with Microsoft. And this type of capability is available with the other clouds as well. Some vendors don't allow you to port licenses, but in reality that's their loss. The key should be that you're using the software, not where it's located. So that's something for you to check in your license agreements. The bring your own is great if you've got the licenses and you're in an enterprise agreement, and so you can really leverage the discounts that are available through that path. But if you are actually just spinning up an environment for a short period of time, you want to maybe do some sandbox work or some innovation labs, then actually it might make more financial sense to just use the pay-as-you-go license model, because then you don't have to extend your enterprise agreement or enter into a new one. So just think about the use case that you're in and determine the best path when it comes to licensing.
Just on this one, Ollie, so when I've been in industry, one of the biggest barriers is that people have thought that it's a radical change, I don't have it in my data center anymore, and they say, yeah, but what about the relationships that I've personally built up over the years with these vendors, right? And we think about Oracle, IBM, lots of different companies, and this is one of the things that I said to them is, that doesn't go away. And yes, it is relatively recent in the journey of cloud that you can do this, but it doesn't go away, and you can still have those relationships. Nobody's telling you as a CIO, as an IT director, that you have to go to now you have to go to Amazon to now to actually go to the Amazon app to now buy your big Exadata instances and things like that. Nobody's saying that anymore. That's not what it is. So a lot of this is telling people that this is actually an option now, which I think it does. It smooths away a little bit, doesn't it? Because a lot of it's around fear. And this was a great move by the CSPs and also by the people like Oracle and SAP and Salesforce to actually make their products more accessible.
Yes. I mean, you mentioned Oracle there. They're probably the tricky one when it comes to licensing, and also their licenses are very expensive as well. So you do need to know where you stand with the large enterprise companies. If you're going to port your licenses across, and we're talking about money, so let's go on to the next slide. So FinOps is it's a term that's gathering a lot of momentum in the industry, and really sort of came about in the fact that when you're in public cloud, you're moving to a consumption model. So your financial controls are you're moving from capex to opex. And that can be quite a challenge, especially if you are working in an environment where your budgets are set annually and you have to know exactly what you're going to spend, and yet here you are embarking on a new project where you don't even know what the design is yet. So moving to the cloud brings is not just a technical change. You have to think about the financial aspects and how you're going to manage it, and FinOps is the mechanism for sort of getting access to the data, your cloud spend, and then working out how that aligns to your business goals and allows you to manage the spend as well. So the term is called FinOps. Understanding where your money's being spent is key, and I hinted at earlier on that you need to make it easy for yourself. So you can do things like tag your services, and then in your billing reports you can then sort and filter by different services, which allows you to cross-charge and charge back to business units or different project teams, so that they're picking up the costs. It also allows you to sort of have a better view of what you are spending, so you can make sure that you don't have budget overruns, and also can then look forwards to make sure that your budgeting is working correctly, sort of on a longer scale perspective. And then finally, just thinking about that return on investment. So one of the big drivers for going into public cloud is to get a better return on investment on your spend, and you can only really do that if you know exactly how you're spending your money within the cloud, and that spend is aligned to the business objective. So there's lots of information in the industry on that. Now let's look at monitoring and alerting. So hopefully you can forgive the picture of a futuristic operations center in the background, with these sort of holographic screens in there. But
Ollie, that's my office,
yeah.
mate.
Is it? Oh, very nice indeed. And although how do you touch that screen? It's a bit weird. Cloud native monitoring and alerting. So on premise, there's the big traditional enterprise management tools that you'll no doubt be familiar with, and potentially you'll have servers deployed with numerous agents in place trying to capture the right information so that operationally you can run things effectively, and when events happen, the alerts can be raised. Now, one of the great things about public cloud is that these services are instrumented by default. There's a vast amount of information that's generated by any cloud service that you stand up, and this is built into the overall platform. So it's not something that you have to configure or turn on or define. These are all out of the box capabilities that come in, and they are then captured in a central manner. Now that's really good, and that means that you don't have to then invest in third-party tools, and also then the supporting infrastructure that those third-party tools will need as well. So moving into the cloud native monitoring and alerting is definitely something to be looking at. The capabilities of each of the cloud providers has really accelerated over the last couple of years. So they are now, I would say, most definitely viable alternatives, and in some respects better because they are there and built in, and so the integration is out of the box. But I think the main benefit that I see is that you can save money, but also operationally there's less to manage, and so you are in the long run going to save from an operational cost perspective. Should we go into the next one? And I think it's my final action to take, and this is the big one, and potentially if you haven't done your lift and shift migration, you might want to start here. But this is the re-architecting and going cloud native. So I've included a picture here, which some of you might recognise, and I'll forgive any ask for forgiveness from any sort of Google or Microsoft people. That's the AWS 6 factors, the 6 R's for how to move to cloud, and we can see that along there's the rehosting, which is the lift and shift, which is what we've been talking about, if we've been starting to go through these steps, then actually we're now in the sort of re-platforming, and that we've reshaped our architecture. We're taking advantage of things like auto scaling, we've maybe dropped some of our network virtual appliances, and they're using some of the cloud native networking tools, and we're using the sort of built-in monitoring that's available in the cloud. Now, where you really start to save money is if you can move away from using VMs and start to use some of the sort of PaaS or serverless capabilities that are built into the cloud. You will remember the donut diagram that we had in one of the earlier slides, the example slide, where the compute power, the VM was 70% of the cost. So if you can start to remove that, then you're onto a big saving. One of the big sort of movements in the industry is the adoption of container technology and Kubernetes as that container platform. There are many sort of abstraction tools that are out there, that third-party tools such as OpenShift or Docker Enterprise, or I think we're not seeing much of that anymore, or Cloud Foundry. And actually, each of the cloud providers has now got their own native Kubernetes platforms that are serverless, and they provide the same functionality of allowing you to sort of run your container without having to think about what the hardware and the VMs is that sits underneath that. And these the cost profile of these services is far cheaper than running virtual machines, and so the re-architecting or as refactoring as AWS will call it, is to really turn your applications into cloud native applications, taking advantage of all of these services that you only really get in the public cloud, and are far cheaper. Excuse me, I'll just pause while the dog barks. Sorry about that. Things like Lambda and Azure Functions are they are transaction-based pricing, so you only pay every time you use it, which is a difference to the sort of pay-as-you-go based on CPU cycles. So these are great things to investigate, and just because you've done a lift and shift doesn't mean you can't then refactor and re-architect, and in the same way that if you're considering a lift and shift, if you are able to actually do a refactoring and re-architecting as part of your migration, then you will create many more savings and benefits. So that they are my 7 actions, and I think we're good if you make use of all of those. Dougie, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
I certainly do. Thank you for that. I appreciate a lot of detail in there, and I believe these slides are going to be available after. But wow, so I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs. I know not many people are, but I just wanted to highlight one more thing. So, the journey to cloud and all of the elements involved in it, it can be a lift and shift. It can be going, all the way in and just going all cloud native, which I knew a bank did about 2 years ago, and it worked incredibly well. It worked incredibly well because they started from scratch, and it was fantastic, and it is brilliant. There are lots of bits in between, right? There are lots of things. We talk about refactoring, talk about right sizing. We talk about using FinOps to be able to get the best out of what it is. Lots of different things, but we've got to consider sometimes that cloud wasn't the best idea in the first place. Okay, so again, I started this call with Ollie saying, I want to be the kind of the counterculture, right? The anti-revolution, and get people to think about actually what is the right thing to do. Because quite often I am an advocate for cloud wholeheartedly, but what happens is I walk into a board meeting, or I'm speaking to a CIO, a director, or a CFO, right, or a CEO, and they say, yeah, but we tried that and it was painful, and we just don't have the bandwidth for paying anymore. So my first question to them is, well, what did you think? What made you think about cloud in the first place? You know, I mean, quite often, sometimes it's a golf trip, or when they say, well, my competitor's doing it, or it was on a Gartner Magic Quadrant, or it was a Forrester Wave, and it's like, wow, so you didn't know what it was, right? So I've heard the board wants us to do cloud. Ollie actually knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. We're not going to say what it is, but painful. But again, right? This happens in real life. You know, you have a lot of people pushing the IT team, pushing the technology function to race ahead because they feel there is a competitive advantage. But like we said at the beginning, they're lacking education. Okay. But let's not ignore the fact that sometimes, especially, you know, with the global challenges that we have, not talking about COVID now, I'm talking about regulatory challenges. You know, there are political sensitivities, there always have been, but when it comes to technology, when it comes to data sharing, when it comes to you know, the creation and management of IP and ideas, there creates regulatory hurdles that preclude you more so prior to about a year ago than now, to move into the cloud. So we talk about data sovereignty. We talk about, one country will say, you know, there is our main fiber connection to, you know, the US or something has to run through this country. We can't have our data going through that country. It's against our national security policy. Nothing to do with technology. Has absolutely zero to do with technology, but there's a regulatory constraint there. This one is, I've had a bone of contention about this, and we talk about a cloud-first strategy. So Ollie and I were talking about this earlier on, and somebody once said to me, I have a mobile-first strategy. And I said, who are your customers? And they said, well, it's generally the older generation. I said, so you're deploying an app what's going to sit on a smartphone, and it's about 5 years ago, for an older generation who won't necessarily have a mobile phone. So there's your flaw, okay? So I've always said, actually, it's cloud, where cloud is the most sensible technology choice to make strategy. So again, you think about hybrid, you think about reverse hybrid, you think about using Azure Stack, you think about Snowball EC2, you think about not using cloud at all. Think about it. Apply the good design principles around, here is my problem. I have a number of solutions. What is going to be the best solution for me? Now, by and large, it's going to be cloud. I say that because I've done this 1,000 times before, but you still got to think about it because, as we've discussed, there are so many different versions of cloud. And if the board wants us to do cloud, then let's go and do it. Let's go and do it at a small scale, though, as opposed to putting all of our eggs in one basket. And the last one, you just did your maths wrong. Again, right? So we highlighted at the beginning. Now, in my experience, it doesn't really look like that. Quite often that peak is a hell of a lot higher and it lasts for a hell of a lot longer. So again, you've just got to pause, think about it. The headline statement, cloud wasn't the best idea in the first place. It wasn't the best idea in the first place because the idea and the thought put into the idea wasn't that good in the first place. So you just got to take a step back. I usually say, don't get excited about it. It's not going anywhere. It's not like a seasonal thing. It's not going to be available in January. It's always going to be here. It's only ever going to get better. So take your time, think about it, apply a little bit of common sense, good strategy. Talk to people like Ollie, myself, who have been there, got the war wounds for you, and we can help you start to rapidly do some accelerators to see where there is potential quick value in using cloud technology and cloud services, but also that strategic long game. What does that strategic long game look like? That is going to give the board confidence first time round, not second or third, but first time round, that taking the approach to cloud is the right thing to do. Any more comments on that before I move on to the takeaways, Ollie?
No, I think they're all really good points, Dougie. You have to make sure you know what you're doing and enter into this with your eyes wide open. And I think it's a bit rude saying that my maths was wrong. I'm very good at maths, so let's sum up. Don't laugh. Let's sum up. So I've taken you through, Dougie and I have taken you through sort of like some of the pitfalls of when you go into lift and shift, and then we've then followed on with some actions that I really recommend you take to get the most out of your cloud migration. The key thing is that to remember is that you mustn't stop once you've done that lift and shift migration, because actually that's the hardest bit. Doing things like turning off your machines when they're not being used is so simple, and it's something that can be done in a very short time frame and start to generate some massive savings. So the important thing I think to realize is that if you've already migrated, you can do something to get even better value from your migration. And if you're about to migrate, then just have a think through these 7 steps, and also the Dougie's good warning around actually is it the right thing to be doing, and then you will be successful. So I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to us today, and hopefully you've been able to take something useful. So just to let you know, we've got our next CloudFest webinar coming up on the 19th of August, and this will be a really good one. Panel discussion, which is the state of DevOps in financial services. I remember last year's one was a fantastic event. So thank you all very much for attending.
Thank you. And just quickly, we have got literally a minute and a half. If you have any questions, and no questions are asked, if you do have any questions, please reach out to Ollie and myself. Obviously, you have the positive response from Ollie, and you have me just telling me you got your maths wrong. But thank you, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.